Hello, welcome to AI in Action. My name is Maurie. I'm here with my husband, Jim. We're going to talk about our table conversations for the last few weeks. Literally, last couple of weeks, we've been talking about Anthropic, Mythos, Fable 5. So this podcast is going to be about the government banning artificial intelligence and those unintended consequences that this might have. Because we all know that the government, they're here to help us, right?
Absolutely.
We're also going to throw in some historical perspective on the government doing this stuff and what the industry said about it back in the day. And of course,
Back in the day, is that like old times when we were?
history, what they said about it historically and what they're saying about it now. So first, let's talk about what's happened recently. And then we're going to go back and talk about what happened, over 30 years ago?
Yeah, about 35 years ago, roughly.
So, banning AI. Why do you think that this is just an accelerant for something that is about to happen?
Well, first of all, let's talk about what happened. June 12th, which is 10 days ago, 11 days ago. The official story originally is that the government had told Anthropic, which makes Claude, that they had to stop any non-US citizen from being able to use two of their models.
Those models being?
In this case, one was called Mythos, which has been out for a little bit longer.
Heard that one.
But it hasn't been generally available. Well, they took a Mythos because it's supposed to be so incredibly powerful, specifically at cracking systems into other systems. They made one called Fable 5.
I saw that advertised every time I went to Anthropic. It was like Fable 5.
Fable 5, people got a hold of it and they were very excited. But then a government person claimed that they had found a way to get past the guardrails.
To jailbreak it.
To jailbreak it to some degree. The Anthropic people didn't react the way the headline says they didn't react fast enough. They didn't react the way they're supposed to. Therefore, the government banned it. Reality, another headline came out that said what had actually happened was the head of the NSA had said that Mythos had been used specifically to, within hours, get into almost every government system. Now, that headline itself is a bit misleading. You have to be careful with that too, because this was part of a red team effort by the NSA. And if you know what the NSA is, they're pretty much they are the U.S. They're the brains for almost all the U.S. hacking that the U.S. does against and defending us against other governments and all this stuff. They're really smart people.
Right.
The National Security Agency. They've been around a long time, and they're kind of the de facto standard for cutting-edge cryptographic stuff. And red teaming means that they were doing an adversarial kind of thing. I call it wargaming. To me, wargaming makes more sense than adversarial. But basically, they're wargaming against your system.
They're testing
internally to test it, looking for breaches, looking for places. So this internal red team, which means they had access to systems somebody outside wouldn't. They had expertise that maybe somebody wouldn't. But either way, it was still very, very good. It gave them access to systems within hours that would have taken weeks. Mm-hmm. So that's the second official story that came out as to why this happened and why the ban happened. But there was a lot of people upset about this. When you talk about it being an accelerant, like the UK said, hey, we're your best partner. We need to have access to these so we can defend ourselves against being attacked by, foreign, non-friendly nations. But as the story went, there was no exceptions made for anyone. Well, that has two particular consequences. One is it irritates your allies a lot. South Korea got irritated about it, and so did the UK, and I'm sure French and others did as well. The second part about it is when you look at it from a business perspective and an international business perspective specifically, and you look at it from a government perspective, the story is I can't trust
that you're not going to pull the
government not to pull the plug on something, so therefore I can't build this in. So this is all this stuff. Now, if you're not really into the the AI space. You don't listen to all the blogs. You don't listen to, the podcasts and all that other
If you
stuff.
don't wake up every morning at 4 o'clock and start listening to AI podcasts from around the world
I
and
don't
having
wake
it in
at
the
4, I get
background
at
when you're
5.
making your breakfast, then you're not in the AI space.
I know every time you get in my truck, a little podcast comes on. I get it. I like that stuff. But if you're not listening to it, then you probably don't even know what Mythos is or Fable 5 or all that stuff. This sphere of, this bubble that
The AI
the
users.
AI people live in,
Mhm.
they tend to think everybody knows what that means when most people are barely using what's there, much
Right.
less
Or they're several years behind.
they're not using these bleeding edge models. So anyway, this is what happened.
Mhm.
And one of the things that we focus on education. We focus on, I almost didn't do this podcast too, because we focus a lot on rural areas.
It's very
And
political. This
well,
one
it's
is
not
a little
just,
more political.
it's political, and it's also like, I don't know if our audience cares. This may be one of those things that's so far out on the bleeding edge that nobody cares.
But you
I
know
don't know.
what?
I don't know.
If
You said it sounded interesting, so we're going to do it.
if I had to suffer through it at the dinner table, I want everyone
Suffering
else
is not what
to
you're
suffer
doing.
through
You're
it.
very engaged in that. It was your idea to continue.
It is
So-
interesting because I think one of the unintended consequences is that these companies are literally going to be saying, okay, fine, I'm not going to invest, I'm not going to purchase, I'm not going to put
I'm
your
going to be very careful with
AI
the bleeding edge stuff.
in my company stuff. I'm going to create my own.
Well, I think more likely they're going to say, I'm not going to use the bleeding edge stuff.
Right.
Or it's a really good excuse if you're another nation and you're having a hard time getting people. Like, I think in the UK, they put like a $500 million into developing some stuff internally, which is kind of weird because DeepMind is in the UK, which is Google. So I'm not sure how that works. But anyway, the interesting thing about that is that now they have an excuse to go to apply or get people more patriotic about the idea of developing
Keeping it
things,
local.
keeping it local, keeping it in our country. They put 500 million, which is a drop in the bucket at the UK, but maybe now when they go back for the next 500 million, it's easier because they can hold this up and say the US government can control our access to bleeding edge technology, and they can turn it off anytime they feel like it.
I
So-
think that is going to definitely be an unintended consequence.
I think that you always have to look at that. But I also think, and we're going to talk, which is this part that I thought you said you found interesting, was because we're in education, we also look at things as if you understood history. And if you don't understand history, you're doomed to repeat it kind of thing. So I remember they called the crypto wars. Now, this isn't cryptocurrency. This is long before cryptocurrency. This is cryptographic wars.
Okay.
And a guy named Phil Zimmerman.
The name sounds very familiar.
Yeah, that just means you're a nerd.
That means I've been around you way too long.
It means you're a nerd. So the government, when they block these things, they've got an interesting way of doing it.
Okay.
They use, and I've got some notes here, but they use export controls. The way I remember the previous one was they used, they classified it as a munition, like
A weapon.
explosive
Right.
kind of thing. And so this happened in the 90s, and they classified an encryption algorithm called PGP that was made by a guy named Phil Zimmerman. There was a huge amount of error. You think about what was going on in the early 90s. This is pre-World Wide Web.
Mm-hmm.
You and I were just getting out of college.
In a basement at Texas A&M University in 1990.
In 1990, we were actually. But the internet was there, but the World Wide Web wasn't.
Right.
But more and more was happening on the internet.
Right.
And so privacy and encryption, because the first version of the internet was completely open.
Yeah. You just put in like
Everybody could contact
IP
everybody,
privacy.
and it was no big deal. But as privacy became a thing, well, they started, the encryption started. Well, governments don't like it when you encrypt things.
well, they can't see it.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the BlackBerry got banned in countries like India, because the BlackBerry was too secure.
They couldn't surveil.
Yeah.
Surveil.
It was too secure.
Right.
So the government classified PGP as a munition.
Because it was a way to encrypt information that no one else could see.
That is correct too.
Okay.
The trigger for the 1990s one was the explosion of commercial high-grade encryption, which I mentioned, PGP. And then, of course, I mentioned the jailbreak, or you called it jailbreak, which is
Right.
what it is for Mythos. So the trigger in both cases was something. And then the national security claim was in the 1990s, this terrorists, rogue states, criminals would use uncrackable cryptography to hide communications from U.S. intelligence. Fast forward, foreign state actors like China and Russia would use the model's elite cyber capabilities to launch cyber attacks. National
Find critical
or
software.
find critical software bugs. So national security claim,
Big
both
claim.
cases.
Yes.
The technical reality was back then, and I remember this, the restricted export grade 40-bit encryption was easily broken by hackers, which left people unsafe, which is why PGP was kind of came out. The supposed jailbreak was simple. This is fast forward to now. The supposed jailbreak was as simple asking the model to fix this code kind of thing. So according to Anthropic, it wasn't that big a deal. So you have two different perspectives. The trigger's somewhat similar. The national security claim's somewhat similar. And again, the industry saying this isn't that big of a deal or whatever, and the government saying it is a big deal. So the industry took a similar stance in both cases. But the headlines is what I found interesting. And I put a few of them in here for you. I thought you might like to read a few of them.
So let's talk about the 1990s
Crypto wars.
headlines
Again,
first.
cryptographic wars, not
It has nothing to do with Bitcoin or coins or crypto coin or anything. Okay. So the Washington Post in 1991 said that the U.S. planned to restrict encryption software exports and it draws protest. Okay. The new North Carolina Journal of International Law in 1994, U.S. export control of encryption software, efforts to protect national security threaten the U.S. software industry's ability to compete.
Yes.
To me, that one is remember that one right there. Okay. Because now in the recent headlines, you're talking Time in June of 2026. Anthropic pulls its most powerful AI models after U.S. bars foreign access.
Because they said they couldn't restrict it. They couldn't help the fact that foreign nationals living in the United States working at Anthropic
Right.
would get access to it.
Here's another headline from Global Government Forum. U.S. forces Anthropic to shut down latest AI models, citing national security concerns.
Same thing.
And TechZine says, fix this code, 3 words behind the export ban on Claude Fable 5.
Now, I didn't include a lot of headlines. If you really wanted it to be apples to apples comparison, the industry screaming, I remember the industry screaming exactly the same thing. The industry back then said, if we don't have access to it, we're not going to be able to sell our products on an international market because they're going to be afraid the U.S. government could crack it too easily.
Right.
So the arguments by the industry was exactly the same. You are reducing our ability to compete. That headline, U.S. export control of encryption software, U.S. threatens U.S. software industry's ability to compete. I've seen that exact same headline
Over and over.
with
Today,
the
in
current
June.
with the current stuff. So they're saying the same things then as they said now. The thing is they're 30 years apart,
Right.
but they're treating algorithmic intelligence as a weapon.
Yes.
And it's an interesting thing because they keep saying it at least ought to update the law where it doesn't say munitions kind of thing. That's, maybe they have updated, but that just seems weird to me.
Yeah. So what they're doing here is they're using trade and export regulations other than just traditional domestic laws to forcibly intervene in commercialized technology deployment.
So I put you some more notes in here because I thought you'd find this interesting.
All right.
About the reaction to the ban. Instead of the headlines, I put kind of a summary in there. So I thought you might like to kind of read through a couple of the
pushback.
The pushback stuff.
So the pushback from Silicon Valley and the tech community follows the same exact playbook. You know, it's almost like they have the same handlers and the same media people that they had 20 or 30 years ago.
They just have their kids now.
I don't know. I mean, some people stay in the same industry from the time they graduate college until
Look
the
at
time
me.
they retire.
Look at me.
So
I've been
maybe
in
it is the
technology.
same guy. And he's
Maybe the
like,
same people.
wait a second. I think I remember this from 30 years ago. Let me go find that ad that we ran then and I'll just change some words and we'll just throw that
Absolutely.
out there. Yeah. So it's the same playbook, is what I'm trying to say. They're
Yes.
focused on global competitiveness, they're focused on overreach, how the government is doing this overreach,
Absolutely.
and the fertility or futility
Futility.
futility that is futile, of trying to lock up math and code. You
Which is
can't
hard to do.
you can't put a lock on it.
Well, I'll tell you about the PGP
You
thing,
really
the
can't.
PGP thing in a minute, as to how he got his out. The corporate backlash, I remember. Does anyone remember Netscape anymore?
I have heard of Netscape.
Well, Netscape basically had the first browser, which has evolved over time into Mozilla and Firefox.
Okay. All right. So they complained that restrictions were handing the global market to foreign software companies.
That's correct.
Basically, they weren't going to be able to get a piece of the pie if
Well,
the
they were
government
saying
intervened.
that, all these other companies, the Chinese companies, back then it was European companies.
They don't care. Like, they don't have these regulations that you guys are putting on us, so it's not an even playing field.
That's the claim.
Okay. So there was open frustration. It was going to halt all new model deployments, all frontier providers.
That's what they're saying now.
And that's what
Yes.
they're saying now.
So in the 90s, they said it was going to hand it to foreign software companies. Fast forward to now, exact same playbook. It's going to hand it to foreign companies. We can't. And then, of course, the economic hit, the companies, are
Oh yeah.
we're going to take a massive hit. We're going to go
Right.
under. I remember all that stuff.
Yeah.
The funny thing about it is that
And did you notice that it happened to Anthropic right before their expected IPO?
them and OpenAI are both going.
Yes. And so that's going to cause that's like a massive disruption possibly.
It could be, and it could be a boost for them because that means they have more value because if there's a model governments are afraid of,
Uh-huh.
investors are going to see that as an asset. I mean, it could have the opposite effect. It may not make their stock be less valuable.
Huh. Let's talk political for just a second. There's been a lot of gain through either short sell or just buying stock with a lot of really wealthy people recently.
Yeah, they play both
Because-
sides of the fence. They short sell it so they can make money when it goes
Right.
down, and they buy
And
it when it goes
That's
down.
because they know what's about to happen when it happens.
Yeah, we have politicians doing that too.
That's what I mean. That's why I
Yes.
said political. I'm wondering if some people are looking at this and thinking
Playing
they're gonna
games?
make a lot of money.
Playing games. Well, they're playing games at a level we're not ever going to play at.
Oh,
so.
of course not. Of course not. So the other thing is the government double down. Our government is maintaining a very firm stance on this.
Well, they had an interview with Trump when he was at the G7 conference, and he talked about they asked him specifically about Anthropic, and he made it sound like that it's not a big deal, that he liked the company. So maybe it's about to become not a big deal. I don't know what exactly they have to do to make it not a big deal.
Right.
I got to wonder, there's a lot of, big moves going on behind the scenes we'll never know about with, Elon Musk being a competitor and having such close ties with the government. He just went public with his SpaceX, which XAI is part of. So there's a lot of things going on there that I probably will never understand. But
Now, hang on. You just mentioned SpaceX.
Yeah.
Elon Musk also owns Starlink.
Well, Starlink is part of SpaceX.
It's part of it. Didn't the government just rescind a bunch of funding that had gone to like rural America?
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with this. That's different.
I think my point is there's a lot going on behind the scenes that two little podcast people in rural America have no earthly idea.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
That's true.
one of the things I thought was interesting here is that the Chief Information Officer, Kristen Davies, she's the Pentagon Chief Information Officer.
Right.
One of the things that she put on X was that some things are simply more important than revenue cycles, clickbait, and pre-IPO validation. America first, always.
That being said, she's basically trying to say that this was done for national security, therefore it shouldn't matter about these revenue cycles and all this other stuff.
Okay.
Again, these are all political games that
Now, you've been there before.
Well,
I mean, one of the things you remember, I mean, you've worked on security software before.
yes,
And
hardware and software.
so if you think back to when you were working on security software,
Mhm.
can you remember a time that you could tell the government was doing something pretty specifically just to like
Well,
halt something for a reason?
Yeah, well, let's talk about Phil for a moment because it's relevant to
Okay.
this. Phil
Zimmerman.
Phil Zimmerman, he created PGP. PGP, which we mentioned earlier, was a military grade encryption algorithm, but it was free.
And it's how you encrypted something.
Yes, if you
It
were going to
wasn't
send a
how
file,
you broke an encryption.
Correct.
It was how you actually encrypted it.
That's correct. You encrypted something so you could send it securely. Well, the government didn't like it. They classified the code he'd written, the C code, stuff he'd written for this encryption algorithm, they classified it as munition
Uh-huh.
and made it illegal to export the code. They went so far as to say, we will put you in jail. He was investigated by the FBI. We're going to put you in jail.
The men in
if
black
you-
suits showed up.
Exactly. If you send this software over the internet, if you send it, because back that was before the World Wide Web, but if
Right.
you send it over the internet, you send a floppy disk or anything with the code on there, and it was small enough to fit on a floppy disk, then you're going to go to jail.
So what did he do?
He printed all of it in a book. Literally, he printed
he
the
published
algorithm.
the book.
He printed the C code in a book and published the book, and then the book got sold all over the world. And the people that wanted the algorithm, they just took and used OCR software or typed it in by hand, right out of the book.
So there was some loophole he found.
The First Amendment. First Amendment.
Freedom of speech.
Yeah, he could publish it. He couldn't. They had forgotten that sending it in disk or in digital form was covered, but sending it in printed form wasn't. That's how he got around it. So
he never got in trouble.
No,
for this?
well, I mean,
did they try?
they investigated him for a while. They ended up dropping the case. They threatened to send him to prison and all this other stuff. But they actually dropped the case completely. The federal government did in 1996. By then, nobody cared anyway. But so Phil Zimmerman was trying to say the same thing that some of these people are saying now about having access to Fable 5 or whatever. If we, like here at the school district, I spend a lot of time these days trying to keep our system safe.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
And it's become a lot of my time. Well, the argument is that how are companies supposed to keep themselves safe against attack if they can't red team with the best tools available?
So I'm sorry, but I agree.
And that there's valid because we are getting attacked. Our firewall
And we're little.
is getting hit all the time, probably by AI tools. And yes, we're little. We're a tiny little school district. Think what the big people, the banks, the national security kind of stuff we're getting hit.
Energy grids and
But
all that stuff.
it was interesting because because we mentioned giving it a historical perspective. You mentioned that I was in the industry. I was, and I remember we were kind of all the people in that industry it was kind of a close-knit industry. The people that were working on different kinds of security cryptographic stuff. And I was working on a hardware software combination piece for biometrics. And I remember us talking about the fact that we thought we could tell when the US government had cracked a particular, what we call a bit length. I can go into it deeper, but I won't. But there's basically two ways that you encrypt data. You use what's called asymmetric keys. That's how you set up an encrypted pipe. And that's the shared key, with this person on the other end. You use that key to then set up what's called a symmetric key, which you use the asymmetric keys are really long and they're very, very intense mathematically, which means they take a lot of CPU power or graphics GPU power to use. The symmetric keys take less. So it's like sending someone a sealed envelope and saying, here's a sealed envelope, there's a key in it. And if you get it and the envelope hasn't been opened, then the key is valid.
Okay.
I've got my public key. I sent it to you. I think that's how it works. My public key, I send it to you. You open it. You encrypt it with my key. And when I get it, I can decrypt it. That transfer, those initial keys, that's done through using the asymmetrical thing. But once you get the keys and you start sending data back and forth encrypted, that's symmetrical. They have bit links. They started out at 40 bits. And they've gotten longer. And it was funny because they would ban, you can use 40 bits, they would say, but you can't use 64 bits.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden you could use 64 bits
Because
But
they
you couldn't
figured out
use
how to do it
128 bit. Well, that's what we were speculating. Is basically the NSA was allowing it to be released as
after they figured it out.
after they cracked it, and then they would ban it. I mean, we were told because we were told we could not export one of our hardware things unless we reduced the bit length because we had too powerful of encryption in
I'm
it.
sorry. I know that sounds like conspiracy theory or whatever, but people, that makes sense to me.
It made sense to us. I mean, we were all. I remember I used to go to the RSA security conferences, and I talked to these kind of people all the time when I was doing that stuff for a living, and it just made sense to us. And I wasn't the only one that thought that. It wasn't me that came up with that. We just talked about it a lot. And so now you look at it and go, well, they're scared of it because they can't control it. And once they feel like they, what they really wanted to do, like with Phil Zimmerman, initially they wanted to backdoor it. You probably remember. Remember when they were talking about putting those digital privacy things into TVs? They're going to build them in.
Yes.
And they wanted to backdoor it so the government could see whether or not you were viewing stolen movies.
Right.
It was about the encryption of these stolen movies and that kind of stuff. So there's been arguments about encryption forever. Now the arguments about the strength of AI. But it's a different kind of problem. But I do remember discussing that a lot. It was an interesting problem. It just seems like that it's always the same story.
Over and over.
Over and over and over. And the same people screaming. And they're all screaming from their own corners with their own agendas. And if you're just a normal person, you're trying to sort out which one's right.
Well, tell me that. Do you think that our government has acted properly in this scenario or in either one of the scenarios?
Well, I understand the government's position. I do. It's sad that we live in a world where we spend all of our time protecting ourselves from each other. I mean, the human race, it's a testimonial to how messed up the human race is when we spend all of our time now to protect ourselves from each other. But I see the government's perspective. The only time I start wondering about it is if when you start spying on your own citizens with it. The argument being, well, we're a free country, which means people can come in like the terrorists that came in and drove airplanes into towers. They were in the United States at the time. They didn't fly in that day from another country. So I understand their desire to spy on their own people, but they tend to take it too far whenever they do that. And I don't know. I can see both sides of it. I think the government probably has a stronger position than the industry does because the industry, it's just purely about the profit. And I could certainly argue that, well, you could just slow it down. So you delay it 6 months. Is it that big of a deal?
Let's wait until you get that 40-bit encryption figured out, and then you can release it.
Is your product so dependent on that piece to be competitive,
right,
that you lose all your competitive edge?
Use an older model.
Maybe. I mean, maybe find a different. Again, if I was the guy that owned the company that was selling cryptography at the time, when we were doing biometrics, it was expensive for us to have two different versions of a chip, one with a lower encryption, bit encryption in there than another. So it was costing us real dollars. And for a startup that's VC funded, that's can be a problem. I mean, when you start looking at it, so you start looking at it and going, I get there. So, it just feels like the government position is stronger because there are some bad people in the world, and
there's a lot of bad
actors. These tools that they're talking about, if it truly can be used to hack into banks, I mean, they can collapse our entire economy. This isn't just about Microsoft. Right. If you get into the Dow Jones or you get into a big bank and you can cause runs on banks, you can do. I mean, we've all seen the sci-fi movies. You can do some pretty horrible stuff.
I think that people need to watch more sci-fi movies, because there's a lot of sci-fi movies that are very predictive. And unfortunately, it has gone a lot more toward a dystopian sci-fi.
It'd be nice to feel some positive ones.
It would be.
Let's go with Tomorrowland.
Something.
I liked it. I remember the name of it too.
You did. So that's our recommendation for this podcast. If you guys are listening in, we recommend that you go watch Tomorrowland.
It felt more positive. Most of the other stuff you see nowadays, it's so dystopian. The future is always awful.
Yes, it is. So my name is Maurie. I'm here with my husband, Jim. Thank you guys so much for listening in. We hope y'all have a marvelous rest of the week.